In this video, I'm going to be taking a personal look at my favourite personal stereo system from the past. It also happens to be the thing that I get the most requests to cover. Yes, it's finally time to take a look at MiniDisc. Now, I've made plenty of videos about old formats over the years, but I tend to focus on the more obscure ones. So when I started getting all these requests in to make a video about MiniDisc, I was a little bit confused. You see, to me, it's not that unusual a format. In fact, there was a point in the early 2000s where everyone that I knew that used a personal stereo to listen to music on the go used a MiniDisc. So I started looking up online thinking, why is everyone so fascinated about MiniDisc? And I found out MiniDisc was a flop. It was a failure. Nobody bought one. Or at least that's what it says online. There is an old adage that history is written by the victors. But in the case of tech history, it seems to be written by Americans because that's where most of the tech writers are based. And as far as the US is concerned, MiniDisc never really happened. Despite Sony's best efforts, people just weren't interested in the format. In fact, I visited the US in 2003 and I went straight to the tech shops like I do in any country I go to see what they got available there that I couldn't get at home. And where I was expected to see MiniDiscs, there weren't any. Instead, there were Sony CD Walkman, whereas in the UK, CD Walkman had come out, but nobody had really been that interested in them, and they kind of faded away by that point. Most online retrospectives I've seen about MiniDisc boil the whole thing down into just a neat little paragraph where they say the first year's sales were 50,000 and it faded away after a few years when other technologies took over. But that's not strictly true. That 50,000 number, that's just for the US, the market in which nobody really paid any attention to it. This is a product that was launched worldwide. But whatever the first year's number, they were lucky to get it, because I'll show you the first year's product in a couple of minutes and it really isn't that enticing a prospect. It was only a year or two down the line when things really started to look up. Now, this is a product that wasn't just on sale for a couple of years though. MiniDisc had about 20 years on the market. In fact, the best personal MiniDisc machine came out 14 years after the launch of the first one. And there were over 30 different companies that brought out MiniDisc devices, and they brought out over 850 different devices. So something isn't quite adding up here. So what I'm going to do now is give you my perspective on MiniDisc, a very personal one as to how it affected me, what I used over the years. So I'm not talking about the whole world. I'm not saying that everyone had this same experience, but I'm just going to tell you a little bit about mine. Now, before I made this video, I did another one about digital audio tape, and it might be worth watching that one first because it goes into quite a bit of detail about the opposition that Sony experienced in trying to launch a product into the US market that was able to make perfect copies of compact discs. Well, of course, the MiniDisc also makes copies digitally of compact discs, so they'll have had a pretty similar opposition to this, and I'm sure that RIAA were not enamoured, and they'll have put a lot of pressure on their association members, which might explain why very few record companies released any music on the format, and I'm quite sure a few words were said to key retailers to discourage them from getting involved in MiniDisc. But that's all supposition about things that went on behind closed doors, so let's move back to reality for a minute. And in the early 1960s, Philips brought out the compact cassette. It didn't really do much until Sony got on board, and together they made it into what it became, which was the #1 music retail format. However, sales were dropping off and it was time to replace it by the early 90s. Philips decided to beef up compact cassette, having a backwards compatible digital compact cassette, whereas Sony decided time to move away from that and move to a smaller version of effectively a compact disc that could also be recorded on. So you got two different camps going two different directions and basically going to release a similar kind of idea at the same time. With the benefit of hindsight, it's clear that this last-minute rush to be first to market didn't do either party any favours, especially on the MiniDisc side, where the first product does seem a little bit rushed in places. But both of them launched around about the end of '92, beginning of '93, depending on where you are in the world. Now, shortly before the launch of MiniDisc and digital compact cassette in the UK, I was at an event where they were both being demonstrated, one after the other. The representative from Sony got up, demonstrated the MiniDisc, showed the machine. You could see the track titles coming across the front, listened to some music on it, did a bit of a Q&A session, and then the Philips guy got up and did the same thing. It was all going fine for both of them. There was no problems at all. Everyone was quite impressed until the Philips guy decided to skip to a certain track. At that point, the tape started winding on because, of course, it doesn't have instant access. So everyone's sitting in the room listening to this thing go moving its way through the tape, and an audible giggle starts up in the room. People are actually laughing at it because at that point, digital compact cassette just looked like old technology that had been tarted up, whereas the mini disc looked a little bit like something someone had brought back from the future. However, not many people wanted to buy either of them because of the price. At launch in the US, the MiniDisc player came out at $750. I've been unable to find the UK price, but I'm pretty sure it was somewhere around about $550, which is far more than I could afford at the time. But even if I could have afforded it, there were a couple of other reasons why I wouldn't have wanted to buy one. So let's get into that now. Okay, so this is the non-operational, sleek, palm-sized mock-up that Sony were showing around to reporters in the year or so before the launch of the MiniDisc, and then this is what they actually delivered. This is the first MiniDisc machine you could buy, the Sony MZ1. Now, just to put this into context, this is the same year that Sony brought out the DJ50, the new super slim Discman. The Discman that was almost the same size as a CD jewel case. Well, I don't have a DJ50, but I do happen to have the odd CD jewel case, so let's put that down and compare it to the MiniDisc. Bang! Look at that. That is ridiculous. Remember, this is a format that has been designed to be smaller than a compact disc, and yet the player that plays it is monstrous. So I'm sure that many people thought the same as myself back in 1992 and decided just to carry on using cassettes. After all, you could fit one of these in your pocket. Now, of course, MiniDisc did improve quite considerably over the years. In fact, the model I've got here on the right is the last in the range. So we've got the first on the left and the last on the right, the RH1. Now, of course, MiniDisc itself didn't reduce in size over the years. The actual MiniDiscs are the same throughout the standard ones and the high MiniDisc that came later. It just shows you how much they were able to reduce down the size of the equipment that played them, though. But of course, it wasn't just the size that reduced, it was the weight as well. So let's weigh the last in the range here, which comes in at a nice lightweight 111 grams or 3.9 ounces. Right, let's try the big fella here, and he comes in as overload. He's too heavy for these scales. One at a time, please. That's 500 grams maximum on those, so we're going to have to get the kitchen scales out for this one. So popping it on here, we can see we're getting a reading now, 700 grams, which is getting on for £2. I mean, this is over 6 times the weight of the final machine. Of course, a lot of this is down to just overbuilding in a way. The whole thing is made out of metal, and it even has a motorised disc loading mechanism on the front, whereas, of course, the later machines were on a clamshell type mechanism. Now, if back in 1992 you hadn't been put off by the price or the size or even the weight, this last stat might have done it for you. This big hefty Nikon battery pack is only able to power it for a total of 75 minutes. That's just enough to play back one mini disc. And later in the format's life, they introduced 80-minute mini discs, so it wouldn't even have got through a full one of those, although at the time of launch you could only buy 60 or 74 minutes. Now, whilst the first machines might not have been that attractive to buyers, that shouldn't diminish anything about the nature of mini-disc technology itself. It's actually quite impressive, not least of which is the ability to fit a full album of music on a much smaller disc. A compact disc of the time, a full one up to the maximum minutes, would have been about 700 megabytes in size, whereas an 80-minute mini-disc like this can only hold 160 megabytes. So of course you need to do something to get one onto the other, and it's through the magic of compression. The compression system that Sony used at the time worked on a ratio of about 5:1, and of course that was designed primarily to fit a 74-minute CD on a 74-minute mini disc. Now, the system they used was called A-Track. And if there's anyone out there thinking, well, why didn't they just use MP3? Well, there's probably quite a lot of reasons why they didn't want to, but even if they did, they couldn't because it wasn't even out at this point. In fact, when Philips brought out their DCC at the same time, they were using MP1. Now, the idea of audio compression was new to many people at the time, so a lot was written about the potential impact that it could have on the quality of music reproduction. The compression worked on the principle that some sounds mask other sounds, which could then be discarded to reduce the overall size of the file. The problem is that MiniDisc came out at a price that only hi-fi enthusiasts could afford, and those are exactly the people who don't like being told what they can or can't hear, so as a result, 8-track got a bit of a bad reputation. However, Sony didn't help themselves. In the rush to get to market, the first 8-track iteration was a little bit cavalier with the audio it threw away, and it could leave music sounding thin and metallic. However, Sony continued to work on developing their 8-track compression system throughout the life of the MiniDisc, and it would take a very long and incredibly boring video to go through all the various iterations of 8-track. So to keep it simple, if you get a MiniDisc that's been recorded at the best quality settings on anything other than the very earliest machines from the first half of the 90s, you can have it sound excellent. And if you really want the best quality, I'd suggest look for something made after around 2000, and that was at the same time they introduced MDLP. So these machines are quite easy to identify. They won't tell you that they're using 8-track 3 and things on the front, but if you see MDLP supported on them, you'll know it's one of the later versions of 8-track, and therefore able to make recordings that can sound as good as, or some people say even better than, a compact disc. Sony were also working hard to make MiniDisc machines actually mini, and the MZR2 from 1993 compared against the original model was half the size, just under half the weight, and had double the battery life. This really should have been the machine they originally launched with. And if you were prepared to forego the recording function and just have a MiniDisc player, then you could get the MZE2. That also came out in 1993, and it looks a lot more like the MiniDisc machines we became accustomed to later in the format's life. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about the makeup of a MiniDisc itself. So on the left, we've got a standard 12cm CD album. On the right is a 6.4cm MiniDisc inside its case. Now, of course, you don't remove it from the case at any point. It's played inside this, and the reason it's in the case is to protect it from getting damaged because it's a portable format. It's no more easy to damage than a compact disc. It's just the kind of thing that you might be carrying around with you in a bag, and you don't want your keys scratching it and things. Now, the plastic case for this is quite similar to the one you get on a 3.5-inch floppy disk, and of course that was also developed by Sony. Now, before you can get in here, you've got to unlock this. There's a little catch here which is holding the door shut, which is a good idea. Again, it won't just slide open in your pocket. Now, unlike a floppy disk, that door isn't spring-loaded. It automatically closes once you remove it from the machine. So it's normally only open inside the machine, which then gives it access to the top as well as the bottom of the disk, which is important for reasons I'll go into in a moment. But before I get to that, I just want to clear something else up. I do get quite a few emails from people that get mixed up over the difference between a mini CD, a UMD, and a MiniDisc. They are three entirely different formats from one another, and they're also different sizes as well. If I remove them from their cases, which is something you wouldn't normally do, we can see that in decreasing order of size we go from a mini CD, which is 8cm in diameter, to a MiniDisc, which is 6.4, to a UMD, which is 6cm. And on top of that, I hear from quite a few people that think their GameCube games came on mini CDs, but they didn't. They were mini DVDs, although they are the same size disc. Anyway, back to MiniDisc now. So all MiniDisc machines used an electronic memory buffer. So it read data off the disc, stored it in the buffer, and you listened to it from there, which meant that you could shake a MiniDisc player around, and as long as you didn't do it for too long, you wouldn't have any interruption in your music. There wouldn't be any skipping. There was a 10-second buffer in the early machines. It varied depending on the play mode as well, and in the later machines you got quite a bit longer. Now, this was a technology that moved across to personal CD players in about 95, so it actually started off in all MiniDisc players and then moved to CD portables later on. Now, one of the main features of MiniDisc, of course, is that it's a recordable medium. So if we just look at the prices of this, it was a bit of a pioneer. If we go back to the 1992 launch price, the first MiniDisc recorder, $750 in the US. If you'd bought a CD writer at that time, it would have cost you $10,000. It was only 1995 when they came down below $1,000 for a CD writer. Now, CD rewriters only turned up on the scene in 1997. So bearing in mind, MiniDisc was rewritable back in 1992, and you could rewrite on a MiniDisc, it says, apparently up to 1 million times. When it comes to reading a pre-recorded MiniDisc, it's read in much the same way as a compact disc works. You've got a laser underneath that reads the data off the disc. However, when it comes to writing on a MiniDisc, it's a different story. Those discs are magneto-optical, and what that means is the data is actually written by a magnetic record head that goes on the top of the disc, and the data is then read back later using the laser from below. But the laser is also used in conjunction with the recording process, because before the disc is recorded on, the laser heats the disc up to the Curie point, 200 degrees C, which wipes out the data ready for the new data to be written. So to give you an idea of what this mechanism looks like inside a real MiniDisc warp, I bought this broken model off eBay. I bought a number of different MiniDisc machines to make this video. In fact, I only had one when I started, and I've got half a dozen now. But let's have a look inside this one. It's going to be quite easy to take apart because we just need to take 4 screws out of the top, and hopefully then we'll be able to see exactly how this all fits together. Okay, so there we go. We've got a laser at the bottom, the lens that you can see there, which will read the underneath of the disc, and then on top we've got this part here. And if we move it along, we'll see that these things both travel along together with each other, so they move along the disc at the same point. And of course that part on the top is the record head we mentioned. If we tip that up, we can see that it's just a little square there, not much to see at all. But we can see that as we put a disc into this machine where it all fits together, the door slides open, the record head goes on the top, and of course the laser remains underneath. And if you were wondering whether a magnet could damage a MiniDisc recording, the answer is no. Well, not unless you heat the MiniDisc to 200 degrees at the same time. From the word go, this was advertised very much as a format that you'd use for recording onto. So you'd have your existing album on, say, a compact disc, and you'd dub it across to a blank MiniDisc so that you could take it with you in a more convenient format. Very little emphasis was placed on the idea of buying pre-recorded MiniDiscs, although they did exist. They were very hard to find. I used to frequent the record shops everywhere I went to, and the only place I ever saw them was in the Virgin Megastore, the flagship store on Oxford Street in London, and even then they were just on a little shelf in the corner. There were a few titles. I bought one for the missus because it was the first time I'd seen them. It was a bit of a novelty, and it was George Michael's Ladies and Gentlemen, which is a double album, and it cost me £25, which is of course considerably more than the equivalent compact disc. I was wondering whether these were more of a thing in Japan, but after I've recently looked through the Japanese auctions online, there are very few for sale there either, so I think it was probably at its height in Europe, and even then very few people bought them over here. Most of the titles were from Sony's own roster of labels, so we're talking about people like Columbia and Epic, and I mentioned in the DAT video that Sony bought music labels so that they'd at least have something to release on their own formats. But if you were looking for a reason to get a pre-recorded MiniDisc back in the day, there are a couple. You get the nice box, you get the booklet at the front, you get the album art, and of course you get the track data, which would also be stored on there and would display alongside the music as it was playing on your machine. Notice on this side of the disc we've got a sticker that covers the whole side, and when you compare that to the blank disc, you can only put a sticker on about half that because it needs access to the top of the disc to be able to record onto it. The pre-recorded ones are not magneto-optical discs, they're just normal optical discs, so they only need access from below for the laser to read the data. This is the most recent MiniDisc album that I own. It's from 1999 and it's a compilation. On the left we've got the 2MD version, on the right the 2 compact cassette edition. I haven't bought too many pre-recorded MiniDiscs for a few reasons, one of which is that there's not many titles that appeal to me. The next one is people say that the sound quality on them isn't as good as if you'd have done it yourself. And thirdly, the prices on them are astronomical. There's some ridiculous prices out there because of the rarity, I suppose, of some of these titles. They've now entered into the world of the collector's market, where all logic and reasoning goes out of the window. So rather than just buying the best quality you could as a lossless file or as a CD, you could spend 10 times that amount to get it on a mini disc. Right, let's get on to talking about some of the different MiniDisc recorders and equipment that you can buy. None of this part would have been at all possible without the help of minidisc.org. That's a website where you'll find absolutely everything you need to know about MiniDisc. It hasn't been updated in a while, but then again, MiniDisc hasn't either, so you're not really missing out. One thing that's particularly useful on there is the equipment browser. It just shows you how many different pieces of equipment came out. I mentioned these numbers at the beginning. I got them from here. There's 26 high MiniDisc machines, 140 recorders, those are personal devices, 164 devices that are just players, personal ones again. Decks, those are models for the home, 129 of those. Just look at all these numbers, look at all these manufacturers as well, all the different machines they brought out over about a 14-year period. If the product really had been the failure that it's just painted to be now, you wouldn't have brought out 30 different machines over a 14-year period. You'd have brought out one or two and then just given up. Now, even though I was interested in MiniDisc from the very beginning, it was only in the year 2000 I bought my very first machine, which was this one. I've still got the box for it, but I don't know where the machine is anymore. I think I might have sold it to someone. I'm not entirely sure, but I found out it came from 2000 by looking on the minidisc.org page about it at the end of 2000. I remember buying it when it was brand new out, and that was because it was the smallest machine available, and also it had MDLP, which was a new thing that had been introduced at the time. So the year 2000 and 2001 was a big sort of period for MiniDisc. It started to appear back in the shops in the UK again. MDLP was introduced with a new version of the A-Track codec, which enabled the MiniDisc to record at lower bit rates with the same or similar sound quality. So LP2 doubled the length that you could record on one disc, and LP4 quadrupled it. I found LP4 affected the sound quality too much and I didn't like it. However, LP2 I couldn't really spot much difference at all, so I used that myself for recording most of my discs. The next year, Sony introduced NetMD machines, and these could be connected up to a PC, and you could transfer your files off the computer, whether they were RIP CDs or MP3s, and transfer them over USB to your MiniDisc machines. Also, it would transfer across the track data. So if you ripped a CD on your computer, it would pull the track data down from the Grace Note database, add that to the file, so you get the nice track display showing on your MiniDisc machine. Now, I didn't want to replace the machine I bought the year earlier, so I bought one of these for the missus on the proviso that I could use it to record any MiniDisc we needed. Now, after I stopped using MiniDisc, this was the only machine that I seem to have kept hold of. I found this one in a box, still with all the MiniDiscs I recorded at the time, and I think I kept this one just in case I needed to play any of those back again. Now, one thing people often say about Net MiniDisc and the way it works is that, well, it didn't work for them. They seem to have a lot of trouble. There was a piece of software called Sonic Stage that you'd have to put on a Windows computer, and you'd also have to load in a thing called OpenMG, and you'd transfer your files across. People reported this software as crashing a lot, causing a lot of problems, a lot of issues. I never had any problems with it at all. Maybe I'm just lucky. I'm not saying everyone's wrong, but perhaps my PC was just perfect for running this piece of software, but it just worked fine for me. One thing people often point out is the fact that this software had this check-in and check-out system. Because of copy protection concerns, they only wanted you to be able to check a song out of it 3 times, as in put it in 3 different places. And once you'd gone past your limit of 3, they wanted you to put one of those back in before you put it out on another thing. People often seem to get very annoyed about this, and I couldn't understand it myself at the time because I never want to put a song in more than 3 different places. I mean, I only had one mini disc player, the missus had one, so that's 2 different people can listen to it at once if we wanted to. And besides which, mini disc blanks were incredibly cheap, so all I ever did was put a song in one place. I'd throw it on a mini disc and I wouldn't wipe it off again. That would be the mini disc with that album on, and then if I wanted to record another album, I'd put it on a different mini disc. So I never needed to check anything back in again. I just kept all the mini discs. That was my solution to that problem anyway. So I carried on like this until 2005 when I bought my first high MD machine. These had been introduced the year before, 2004, and the model I bought had been on sale since then, and when I got it, it was heavily discounted. I think it was about half price, so I couldn't really resist it. High MiniDisc is almost a complete product relaunch. These new 1GB discs could only be recorded on or played in new high MiniDisc compatible devices, although one of those new machines would also be able to record to and play back the earlier standard MiniDiscs. Now, the high MD machine that I had at the time was absolutely gorgeous, and in a way I do regret selling it. However, at the time I wasn't all that upset because I managed to sell it on at twice the price that I bought it for in the sales, and I used that money to fund, yes, unfortunately, my first iPod. Now, the reason this particular model attracted me, it was the iPod 5th generation with video. It was the first time the price had come down to something slightly sensible, and it added in the ability to play back video, which is something I wanted to do. I wanted to watch video podcasts, and of course it held 30 gigabytes internally, which would have been 31 gigabyte mini disc to carry around on my person. So yeah, 2005 is the year that I got out of MiniDisc. Now, when I started thinking about making this video about 2 years ago, I only had this one MiniDisc Walkman left. So I picked up a few additional models so that I can show them to you. One of the ones that I was fortunate enough to get a couple of years ago, before the prices went completely ridiculous, was this model. This is the MZR-H1. You saw it earlier on. It's a high MiniDisc machine. Many people consider it the pinnacle of the personal MiniDisc recorders. Came out in May 2006. It was on sale for about 6 or 7 years. In the end, it was primarily marketed as a professional recorder for people like reporters. But before I show you that, let's go right back to the beginning and have a look at this one in a little bit more detail, because I bought this as a broken machine. I just wanted a prop to be able to demonstrate the size to you in the video, but I was also intrigued as to whether I could get it working. When I plugged the power in the back, nothing happened. The battery couldn't be charged. Obviously, it's too old for that. But I found out if I put wires into the car mount, which is what that part is on the top, and then applied the appropriate voltage into that, I could actually get it to power up. So I was quite interested in actually seeing it in operation. So I've got the relevant voltage here, which is 10.5 volts put into the back. I've got a pre-recorded mini disc here. Now, of course, this thing will only play standard mini discs. It couldn't play MDLPs or high mini discs, but we've put this one in here and we can see it loads into the motorized slot there, and it does play. It does still work, which is very nice to see. It's a very over-engineered piece of equipment, this. I don't have any desire to carry it around with me, but it's good to see something like this working. Look at that, disc is inside, little eject mechanism on the front there. So yeah, good old Sony, still working kind of after all these years. Now, this particular model, the one I bought for the missus, the MZN707, this is a typical device of the era. You get a little cradle, you're supposed to have a little rechargeable battery that goes in the top there, or just use normal double A's, and one of these will give you, I think, somewhere around about 45 hours, oh, there it is, 42 hours of playback. You can see at the bottom in one mode, or up to 56 if you're doing LP4, which is probably not really advisable because it sounds a bit ropey. Of course, they've always got these inputs and outputs. So you've got an optical line in, and then you've also got the headphone socket on the left there, as well as that USB socket on the right we saw earlier on. These headphone sockets always use one of these little inline remote control things with a display on it. They're always very nice to use, these. You can skip the tracks, stop them, adjust different things on the top, bass boost, stuff like that. You've got a clip there which clips it to your clothing, and you can unplug the headphones that come with it and replace them with some better ones if you want to. I remember back in the day that all my interaction with my machines was through a remote control like this. Very rarely would you get the machine out of your pocket, only perhaps just to change the mini disc in it. You could do everything from one of these controls. You could skip around the tracks, you could stop it, you could turn it off, and if you pull that end part out, it acts as a volume control. You had everything here that you needed, and it just clipped to the front of your jacket. A net MD machine like this nowadays can be picked up from anywhere from about £40, although you do want to make sure you're getting the correct remote control for it as well. The big disadvantage though nowadays is that any of the net MD or Sonic Stage software, whatever it's called, just isn't supported anymore. So I'm pretty sure it's unable to operate on any modern version of Windows. Therefore, you'll be unable to transfer across any of that track data from your computer. You're just going to have to record directly from a compact disc, and then you're just going to be ended up with a display that shows track 1, track 2, etc., not the actual names of anything. Now here's an unusual little MiniDisc machine I found, designed more as a business recorder or a dictation device, but it also of course functions as a fully fledged MiniDisc recorder. Now one thing that MiniDiscs rely on is a table of contents at the start of the disc to tell it what is on the disc, and obviously this one has nothing on it at the moment. However, if we press record, we're starting to record now. See mic internal, so it's recording through this little microphone here. It does get pretty good quality as well, but one thing you have to be careful of with MiniDisc, if you stop recording, you've got to watch out that the table of contents is still editing for a little while afterwards, so you can't just pull the disc straight out of the machine. Now this machine has a particular trick. When I press down record, you'll see I've got a little light here as well to show me that that's a kind of record level indicator, but it's a mechanical switch which has a servo in it, so if I press stop, it's not actually popped up yet. Whilst the table of contents is still editing, the button is held down and then it pops up once it's finished, so it stops you losing anything you've recorded. Now if we want to listen back to that, just press play, and we're listening to track 2. You'll see I've got a little light here as well to show me that that's a kind of record level indicator. So that's a really good little machine. I don't think this is a bad one if you wanted a little MiniDisc portable. A couple of reasons why. I mean, you can still stick your headphones in there, and line in is optical, and also it runs off 2 AA's. And of course you've got that little built-in speaker there as well. So nice little machine, this one. This particular model is the MZB10. I think B stands for business, and it's also MDLP and Type S, which is particularly good. So there you go, that's a nice little portable there. One popular use for small MiniDisc recorders back in the day was to make bootleg recordings of concerts. Of course, you can plug in an external microphone to get better quality sound. I'll show you another neat little trick on this machine. It's able to adjust the speed of playback. Okay, so it's time to move on to high MD, and I couldn't really make a video about MiniDisc without showing you the first machine and the last machine, and the last machine is also perhaps the best machine. This is an absolutely gorgeous device. I got this brand new in its box. The box was a bit messed up, but the things inside were completely sealed and brand new. The only time I've got it out is to charge it up and demonstrate it here to you in this video, and it's gorgeous. That display on the end of there, that's a OLED display, very high resolution, nice and sharp. You can adjust it between a few different modes, showing left and right VU meters, or it would display track data if it was recorded on this particular disc, which it isn't. It's just been recorded off a CD, but we've got this nice little bouncing display here, or this one with these globes that change size for no particular reason other than it just looks cool. I mean, this is a lovely, tactile, lightweight, well made. This is really the end of the line for Sony as far as this kind of thing goes. This mechanical miniaturization, this is really the pinnacle of everything they've done up to this point. But now let me tell you why you probably don't want to get hold of one of these. Unlike standard blank MiniDiscs, which are relatively easy to find and still reasonably priced, high MD blanks are the opposite. They're hard to find and very expensive. They don't manufacture them anymore, so the ones that are still available are being sold off at ridiculous prices. Now, fortunately, a subscriber to the channel sent me his old supply of blanks because he'd already got rid of his machine and didn't know what to do with them other than send them on to me, and I'm indebted to him because that meant that this video was possible, because I then went ahead and tried to find a machine to use them on. And bearing in mind that each disc can be reused 1,000,000 times, there's really no worry about buying second-hand discs. But now let me throw another spanner in the works. It's to do with the battery. On this particular model, the RH1, it uses this little lithium-ion gumstick battery. Again, something that's no longer being manufactured. You can find them on eBay, but they're going to be old stock from 10 years or so ago perhaps, and they're asking about £100 per battery with no guarantee as to how long it's going to last. Okay, but let's not get all miserable here. I know the channel's called Tech Mode, but it doesn't actually mean anything. In fact, I'm not too sure now why I even bought that URL. But anyway, you're all right with the battery. You've got a load of these discs. You're thinking, that's fine. Let me just go and get myself a Sony MZ-RH1. Those things can't cost that much, can they? Yes, they can. Now, I got mine a while ago, and I think it cost me something around about £350, which at the time made me feel a little bit sick pressing that buy it now button. But looking at these prices now makes me feel like I got a positive bargain. I've got to say, though, that high MD is the kind of thing that's best left to high rollers. Excuse the pun. Now, on the other end of the scale, here's a nice, small, neat Walkman, which didn't cost me a lot of money. This one was £30, and it's a playback-only device. Now, of course, if you're getting a playback-only device, you're going to have to either use pre-recorded MiniDisc or record your own on some other machine, presumably something attached up to a hi-fi. Now, this has buttons on the machine itself, as well as the usual headphone socket, which has that inline remote control. Now, I didn't mention earlier on, but these are also backlit, so you can look at them in the dark, which is always nice. I always used to find that quite exciting. It's a bit like looking at something in Times Square going past. But you can see this one's even smaller than the RH1, because of course they can make it smaller because they're not including the recording mechanism. Now, this one can be powered from this external battery pack, which takes one AA battery and will no doubt power it for 2 or 3 days or something ridiculous. However, it does make it look ugly, and it sticks out, and it adds a lot to the size of it. So I'd much rather use it from its built-in battery, which fortunately is a removable battery. It's a gum stick that you can slide out of the machine to charge it, and you charge it in a separate charger. And unlike the lithium battery used in the high MD, the RH1, which you can't get anymore, these are readily available and don't cost an awful lot either. Now, this particular model is the MZ-E900, and it's also capable of playing back MD-LP recordings. Now, the last model I'm going to show you is something a little bit unusual. It's a hi-fi component. It's a high MD device made by Onkyo, and Sony never made a high MD hi-fi component. The only people who did were Onkyo. Now, despite this machine being advertised as a high-end, high MD recorder, I was surprised to find it doesn't have any kind of optical output, which means I can't send digital sound off to a more modern digital to analog converter. But let me show you one thing I can do. If you use a standard MiniDisc in any high MD recorder, it gives you the option to reformat it in a high MD format. And what this does is it doesn't give you the full 1 GB capacity of a normal high MD disc, but it makes more efficient use of the space on the standard disc. So in the case of an 80-minute blank, you can get 2 hours and 20 minutes recording out of it in the 8-track 3 plus 256 kilobits a second rate. And notice at the top there, we've also got the ability on this machine to record in linear PCM, and of course those times are quite short, but it's also uncompressed. So we're getting towards the end of the video, and I'll admit there's a lot I haven't gone into in all that much detail. Linear PCM recording or sound quality in general. I haven't played you back a sample from a CD versus a high quality MiniDisc recording because they'll both sound the same over YouTube once it's been re-encoded. MiniDisc itself, of course, was just a data storage format, so it wasn't just used in audio devices. There was a MiniDisc camera or two. There was also a MiniDisc camcorder, as well as the various devices that are attached up to computers. There was a 4-track recorder, which was quite clever. I mean, there's a lot of things to do with editing on MiniDisc that I haven't even discussed because I never got involved in it, but I know a lot of people did a lot of clever things with editing. You could snip bits out, join bits together, and it was seamless once you listen back to it. Also, I've got a MiniDisc machine brand new in its box, other than the fact it was taken out once to be pat tested, and I haven't really had a look at that one yet. So perhaps there's enough there for a future video. However, I think I've taken up more than enough of your time on this one. But there's just one more thing I need to mention just before we get to the end monologue section. And I was looking at the dates as I was putting this one together, and it appears that I used MiniDisc daily for about 6 years. Whereas when I replaced it with an iPod, I only used that iPod for about 3 before moving on to a smartphone. So it shows you how everyone has a different experience. In my experience, I used the incredibly successful iPod for half as long as I used the terrible failure MiniDisc. Anyway, back to me. So history has recorded MiniDisc as a failure, but that's certainly not how I saw it, and I'm sure there are plenty of other people around the world that had a pretty similar experience to mine. There isn't much point nowadays though in getting into MiniDisc. After all, it is just digital music files and you can play those back on any modern smartphone. But smartphones don't really have as much personality as most MiniDisc players. By that I mean last year's smartphones will look pretty much the same as this year's, which will look pretty much the same as next year's. MiniDiscs seem to look different to each other. There was a certain interest in seeing the new models that came out and how they'd managed to miniaturize things and add additional features, how the physical controls work, little OLED screens. I mean, one thing I miss, I've got to say, is this little remote control where you can see the track titles and skip back and forth and adjust the volume without getting the thing out of your pocket. That's something you don't see with modern smartphones. And of course this one even has a headphone socket. But for a device that is 11 years old, this thing doesn't really look out of date, but unfortunately it just holds 1 gigabyte, which is nothing in the modern age. So MiniDisc has been and gone, but that's no reason to try and write it out of history. It did have a good 15 or so years when it was an actively sold and marketed and purchased product. For many people, it was the first time they bought a device that played digital music files that they could carry around in their pocket. And that's what history should show. Not a failure, but a pioneer. But anyway, that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.
Hey, what's up YouTube? It's Zach here! Today I'm going to show you how you can turn any fridge freezer into a time machine. All you need...
Oh, this video keeps stopping at the same point. Can you see if it works for you?
It's because of that computer that you're using.
Oh, not this again.
Oh yes, you sheeple with your overpriced fruit-based computers.
My sister gave me this.
You upgrade every year whenever they add an amazing magical component that they've copied off someone else.
I've had it for years.
And then you go around telling everyone, look at me with my amazing magical computer, sitting outside coffee shops, drinking soya latte.
It's never left the house, and the only person who seems obsessed with it is you. You bring it up every time you can. What's so great about your computer?
Well, I don't blindly follow the crowd. I do what I want. I'm an individual. I run Microsoft Windows. I'm a cyber renegade, living life on the edge.
Hey up, kids! What's going on?
We're having an argument about computers.
I was just asking a simple question, but he seems to be obsessed with the manufacturer of this computer.
Flippin' heck, that's why I use Linux. I don't have a clue how to use it, but it's a way to gain the moral high ground in conversations like this.
I was trying to watch this time machine video that everyone's going on about, but it just keeps freezing.
Oh, I watched it earlier at my house. It was working fine.
What browser were you using?
Chrome.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I'm using Chrome and it doesn't work for me either.
Why couldn't you say that earlier? That's all I wanted to know.
It must be your internet connection.
Yes, our ISP is rubbish.
See, united by a common enemy. I can feel your anger. Let the hate flow through you.
Oh, no, hold on. It's working now. Try it on yours.